Alright, now we're going to look at balance and proximity. So in this lesson, we're going to explore on a brief level the principles of balance and proximity. So what I want you to think about is, if an adult sits on one end of the teeter-totter, how can small children balance the teeter-totter? I'm sure you get a pretty good visual in your mind. Then also, when you walk into an environment, what do you assume about the individuals who are seated in the same area? So if you go into a classroom and there's a group of kids seated in the same area, what do you think about those kids? Alright, balance. It's the distribution of things, and it can be your text, it can be your images, it can be the navigation, the headers, your banners, but it's how you distribute them on a website. And you want your site to look balanced. So think about that teeter-totter. If you have a big graphic on one side, so say this is a web page. If you have a big graphic over here, maybe you want to balance it out with smaller graphics and maybe some text. Okay, but you want your website to look balanced, and we'll get more into this in the next slides. There's three types of balance. You can have a symmetrical, where it's the same on both sides. You can have asymmetrical, or you can have radial. When we talk about symmetrical, it's a line drawn right down the middle of the screen, and it's balanced on both the sides. So do the items on one side balance the other side? And this balance is most found in nature. It's pretty common in nature. And then a good example is your face. If you drew a line right down the middle of our face, you'd see our eyes equal distance from the line, and same with our ears. So if you look at this screen, most of the information is on this side, and so it's not really balanced. But if you just look at the graphics, if you fold this in half, this rectangle side will meet up with this, so that part is balanced. Asymmetrical. It does take some planning, okay, and it's the teeter-totter example. Okay, so symmetrical is you have the exact same things. So here's our line on both sides. Okay, pretend those are the exact same. Asymmetrical is we have our line, we have the large item over here, and then you have smaller items that equal out the large item. Okay? So you can have asymmetrical balance, or you can have symmetrical, and I've seen it in both websites, and when you go back to your website that you're analyzing, look and see what kind of balance they are using. And lastly, you have a radial balance, which is balance from a center point. And so if you start in the middle and you work your way out, it's balance, and it helps show connections and unity. Some things that help create your balance is your alignment, and you have four types. You have left, which everything's lined up on the left, which is what we're used to. You have right, which everything would be lined up over here on the right side. You have centered, which everything would be right in the middle. And then you have justified, which makes it lined up both on the left and the right and puts spaces in the middle. Alright, we talked about left alignment is common in European cultures, and this is what we see every day, and it means the left margin is flush and you have the jagged margin on the right. Then you have right alignment. It's more common in Arab cultures, and it's the opposite of left, and so you have the flush margin here where it's all lined up, and the jagged on the left. And then you have the centered. Okay, it's common for titles and heading, and both margins are jagged. It balances the text, but it can be difficult to read. just because we're used to having the flush margin. So you can see it's jagged on both sides, okay, but it's centered in the middle of the page. And then this is a good example of justified. It's more common in newspapers and magazines, and both margins are flush, and they put extra space between the letters and words. So you look at this side, it's flush, and this side is pretty flush. Just right here you have the sentence ending. So at the end of the paragraph, it won't push it all the way over. But you can look and see the spaces that they incorporate between the words, especially between here, to make it equal on both sides. So that's justified alignment. Alright, so that the alignment can help create balance, a sense of balance on your website. Now let's look at proximity. Proximity is the measure of the distance between things. So that's the second question I wanted you to think about through the lesson. Sometimes you have a larger distance between unlike items, and other times you have smaller distance between related items. So when you're designing a web page, you're going to put the items that are related closer together, and then the items that are different you may put on a different page or a different part of the page. Okay, so when you're talking about proximities, and we're talking about when we're talking about proximity, you're talking about the distance between things, and when we start talking about that, we start talking about a concept called white space. Okay, that is the area without text or images. Okay, and it's created by proximity, and it can be used to organize information and content on your web page. So again, if you have a typical web page and you have your banner up here, and maybe say you have your nav going down the side, and then you have your text box maybe here. Well, the space in between is the white space. Okay, the more crowded you have stuff, sometimes it makes your page look more jumbled. But sometimes, and there's a fine balance. You don't want to have it so far apart that it looks separated. So, but you group things together, and you may group your items closer together in the middle, right here, to show that they are similar. Okay. Now we have the Gestalt theory. This theory is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So grouping ideas or images together creates a stronger message than the sum of the separate parts. So you have these ideas, and if you put them apart, you have all this white space here. Okay, and it gives them the illusion that they are separated. But when you bring them together, it's more of a cohesive group. So you have them together, that the sum of the parts is stronger than each individual part. So depending on what you're trying to convey, you want to keep your similar topic ideas together, and you want to have a little bit of white space between the stuff that's not as similar. And this is done a lot of times in your writing. Just think about paragraphs. You group that similar information into a paragraph, and then you have a space between the end of the paragraph and the next paragraph, and you have a little indent. So, alright, so you're going to look at your website, and you're going to analyze it looking at balance and proximity and how it's used, and be sure you provide a justification for each. Now remember, you do not have to write a paper, but you have to have some sort of project that conveys the information about your website. It can be a screen recording, it can be a PowerPoint, it could be a Prezi, it can be anything you want, as long as it's able to convey about each topic for this project here. So let's go look at some websites here, and before we do, just think about how when we look at these websites, think about the balance and proximity and how it's applied to these websites. Alright, I I am here at this DaveHarperDesign.com, and if we look at some of these websites here, let's look at balance first. And if you look at this website, it's divided into 3 columns. Okay, think about, you have this column right on this side, that's a smaller column, and then you have a column over here on the right that's smaller, and then you have everything in this bigger column going down the middle. And so her navigation's up here along the top, okay, and then separated you get down to the content. So if we look down here, you can see how everything is pretty much symmetrical down this page. If we drew a straight line, it would be pretty much symmetrical. Notice when the ads stop down here, they stop over here at a pretty similar spot. And so again, this would be an example of a symmetrical web page. If we were to draw a line straight down the middle, notice there's a picture same size on each side of the line. So this would be a good example of symmetrical. And we can also look at some of the other concepts that this person's using. Notice how they're using this dotted line to separate, and we got this pink banner here to separate content on our web page. Okay. And this background, you know how they created textures with doing these jagged lines, curvy lines. Alright, let's go back. Now this has asymmetrical. Okay, so they got a lot of information here on the left, and then they balance it out over here with this black space on the right. Okay, if we look at this, this is perfectly symmetrical. Okay, so we have, if you drew a line straight down, it's same side of information on the left as it is on the right, and you can see the texture background that's created with these images of roses. And then again, we have asymmetrical. Okay, and but notice all these little boxes here help balance out this side over here. And this site's not in English, but it doesn't need to be, because we're looking at the symmetry of the website. Even if this website was pushed to the middle of the page, it'd still be asymmetrical, because we have this one column over here that's smaller than this column. For proximity, he uses space, and it's the distance between shapes and form. So if we look at this one, you can see the space, how it's spaced out. You know, the use between the space here to separate these ideas. And also, this would be an asymmetrical site, because we have this large graphic on the left balanced out by the information on the right. Let's go look. Again, large graphic on the left balanced out with information on the right. So let's look at a site that we may be more familiar with. Let's look at Nike.com. Okay, if we scroll down, up here it's not symmetrical because we have this over here. But this is just where they chose to put their navigation, right? But when we scroll down, notice it's symmetrical on each side. Okay, and if you look, see how they group information together. So let's go look at NFL, since it's, let's look at AFC. Let's go to the Denver Broncos. Alright, so notice how they group. They have the white space to separate the difference between jerseys. Okay, if we scroll down, notice how they divide it. And then now you start looking at shoes. And so they're grouping similar items together, and they're dividing it with this gray bar in between. And this, think about the shape. The rectangles they're using as containers. Okay. So that's balance and proximity.